Hey everyone, and welcome back to Behind the Spacebar. Behind the Spacebar is a podcast for music directors, musicians, playback techs, really anyone performing on stage with Ableton Live. Today we are going full into tech. Sometimes we talk a little more esoteric, sometimes we talk a little more philosophical. You know, last week's episode, we talked about how to learn new software quickly, which could apply to anything. This week, we are talking specifically playback world, gear. It's going to be really fun. So today's episode, I want to share 4 reasons why you should create a redundant playback rig. First, let's define kind of what that means. Now, I'm using the term playback rig to kind of define the gear that you use to get audio out of your computer on stage. Now, if you're watching this as a church musician, church worship leader, and you're familiar with the app Playback or maybe Prime, we'll include both of those in this as well too. Whatever you're using to playback tracks, you got to have something to get audio out. You've got maybe a MIDI controller or something in your rig there. That's your playback rig. Now, should there be a reason that you have a redundant playback rig? Now, what does that mean exactly? When I talk about redundancy is just simply a backup plan. I have a bottle of water here, but once I finish that bottle of water, guess what? I have a A-B redundant rig. If this bottle of water goes down, I move over to this bottle of water. That's redundancy, right? It's going to the grocery store and buying 2 of an item and going back home and using up one. And when you have the last item left, you go back to the grocery store and buy 1 more, or maybe you buy 2 more. It's having a backup plan. When it comes to live performance, it's having a backup plan. If your tracks go down, then you have a backup plan to go to a backup computer. The most lowest level of redundancy, this is something I've done in the past. This is something I've seen folks do as well too, is you have a computer that you're using with Ableton Live on it. Something happens with your computer. You pivot to your phone running Apple Music, whatever, maybe running Playback or Prime, and you plug a 1/8 inch to 2/4 inch cable into a direct box. That's your redundant plan. If your computer goes down, you go to an iPhone. That's that's redundancy at its most basic form. Now, the redundancy I'm talking about is a redundant playback rig that gives you the ability to essentially take that time period between my tracks going down and them coming back up and take it from maybe a minute to, you know, the lead singer like riffing and trying to delay us and extend some time so that I can switch over to my iPhone, my iPad to playback stuff. It's taking that time down to instantaneously. So if my A computer goes down, my B computer picks back up exactly where we left off. That's what I'm talking about when it comes to a redundant rig. Now, a lot of people back in the day, this is still a valid solution. Still, a lot of people use this. And it works well for what it is. A lot of people back in the day use the Radial SW8. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see this on the screen. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, I'll add a link in the show notes here. But the Radial SW8 was essentially a direct box, and then it was a switching direct box, right? It could do auto switching, it could do manual switching. And it allowed you to basically use 2 audio interfaces, connect. Oh, look at that handsome devil right there. That was, I forgot I did that video way back in the day. I'm surprised that video is still up on the channel, but thank you, Multitracks, for leaving that video up. But I walk through on this video here showing how to use, create a redundant Ableton Live rig. I'll actually link that up using the SW8. Which was fun. I remember doing that at Sweetwater, which was a really, really cool deal there. But a lot of folks, when they think of redundancy, or at least back in the day, would think of the SW8. But one of my favorite solutions to this, and in full disclosure, I do some work for this company. They're great friends of mine. I think they probably have a video I did for them as well on the site. The iConnectivity Play Audio 12. If you've gone to Sweetwater site, you've 100% seen my video that I did for them. The Play Audio 12 is a redundant playback rig in one box. Now, people that have been around for a while, or people that, well, I'm going to choose my words carefully here. Some people look at this and go, well, how can this be truly redundant? Because it's one interface, it's one box that you're relying on. Well, that's true. And I know a lot of folks that for redundancy on the Play Audio 12, they travel with a additional Play Audio 12. I know some people that like to live their life in a constant state of panic. They travel with 2 Play Audio 12s and a Radial SW8. So if one Play Audio 12 goes down, they can use the SW8 to switch to the other Radial, or the other Play Audio 12. It's a weird cacophony of crazy mixture of things. basically Play Audio 12 is a great solution for redundancy, but here at its essence, what is a redundant playback rig? It's a playback rig that if your first computer goes down, it automatically jumps to your second computer. Okay. I suggest the path forward that I would suggest that you take, and I'm going to drop some links here in the show notes in the description of this video where you can get to the SW8 as well as the Play Audio 12 if you would like. At its essence, I would suggest getting a Play Audio 12. We'll talk about one of the reasons when we get to reason number 4. I'll talk about a big reason to choose the Play Audio 12 here in a second. But I want to share 4 reasons why you should consider a redundant playback rig. It all comes down to answering this question before we get to this for 4 reasons. What happens if tracks go down? I remember being at Sweetwater. This was probably 5 years ago. I was at an event doing a Sweetwater sales engineer meeting. And I was at an event with the band The Digital Age based out of Waco, Texas. And I was talking about the importance of a redundant rig. This was pre-Play Audio 12, so I talked about the Radial SW-8 and was showing how to set that up and do that. And we got to a point of the show where BWAC, the drummer, said, you know, basically if my computer goes down, everything goes black, right? If tracks go down, their show kind of comes to a halt. Things go black. Thankfully for them, I think it said that it happened one time. And for them, they were okay with just the space to take a little bit of time to riff, to talk, and then, you know, get the computer booted back up and everything was great. But essentially what happens if tracks go down, that kind of leads to, should you use a redundant rig or not? Here's 4 reasons why I think you should. Number 1, if tracks are crucial to shaping the sound of your band, right? If tracks are crucial to shaping the sound of your band, then you should use a redundant rig. Here's a couple examples I wrote down. Number 1, effects, whether that's vocal effects, whether that's additional elements that you took your song from the studio to the stage and you've added in some bass drops and some things that can't be recreated on stage, but are helping add to the emotional element of the show. I remember helping my buddy Adam Tico Hernandez, for music director, guitar player for Lauren Elena, and he sent me a set, and I was helping him with some routing stuff. And I was just listening to the tracks, and it reminded me of what a good music director does. And Tico did a great job on this. A good music director doesn't say, "Let's get the tracks from the studio and let's just blow them in Ableton Live and press play." They go, "How can we shape this emotionally? What sounds can we use? What, maybe pre-recorded things, we'll talk about that in a second, can we use that we're not in the studio to help translate this live?" Maybe it's taking a section that would be like a vocal breakdown and you do like kind of a DJ remix, auto filter, sweep, white noise thing, like something pretty simple. Those little simple things can take a song live and emotionally add just a whole nother element to it. Another example I see often is pre-recorded voiceovers. Typically someone will start a song, not typically, but I've seen a lot of times where an artist will start a song and their song has something to do with some social injustice or some thing that the song has a statement. Let's say it that way. And in this particular song, they want to make a statement about a political thing or a social justice issue or really just anything. I mean, it doesn't have to be something political. I know you should never talk about politics, but you know what I mean? It's a song that has a purpose. And within that song, in order to drive home the point emotionally, because I think that's so much about what live stuff is about and using tracks live. Sometimes we think it's about, oh, fill in missing musicians, or I'm going to play this drum loop so my drummer can play on top of it. Those are great, but tracks are often used as a moment to add a element, to add a additional kind of emotional moment, right? To elevate a song from the studio, to perform it on stage, to drive your point home, particularly those songs with a purpose, right? They're on a specific topic. You will have pre-recorded voiceovers. So you'll have something where maybe this historic person from time is reading a statement, or maybe you're speaking against a certain person and you can play a statement that person said that drives on the point of like, yes, that person's a bad person, or we should be doing this thing, and you have this voiceover or whatever. That can only be accomplished with tracks. I guess you could do that at front of house and have the sound engineer have it like queued up on their phone in a YouTube video, and when they think they're at the right part of the song, they press play. But you could grab that voiceover, you can EQ it, you can take out the background noise, drop that right in exactly at the moment that you need it for your song, and everything would be great. Another example here about tracks being crucial to shaping the sound of your band. is performing with musicians or artists that aren't there. So a lot of times artists will do collaborate with another artist, and they'll go, here's this song featuring this person. Well, that person's on tour in a completely different country. So they have them show up on a big LED wall behind them, and they're playing and singing. Well, that person's vocals are in the track. They're not coming from a video. They're in the tracks. They've been EQ'd, affected. They're going to front of house, where the front of house audio engineer has control over those, can bring them up or down as needed. That in that situation, tracks are crucial to shaping the sound of your band. Number two reason you should use a redundant playback rig is if you're using tracks to fill in for missing musicians. I saw this happen very recently. This was for Easter. We were watching a NASCAR race, and they had like an Easter service beforehand. And my buddy Matt was on stage with Chris Tomlin leading worship, and they had drums, Matt on keys, the worship leader guy, Chris Tomlin, was playing acoustic and singing, and then electric guitar, but there was no bass. There was a bass amp on stage, so I don't know I should text Matt to see what the exact scenario situation was, but we're watching it, and I'm like, no one can really tell. Like, people that don't know. They have no clue that bass really isn't there. We hear bass because they're playing with tracks. That bass is, I would imagine, a separate output to front of house, so they can EQ it, treat it just like a bass. He may have even plugged it into the bass amp so that it showed up, essentially showed up at front of house exactly where bass should be, even though bass wasn't there. And that situation, if tracks were to go down, suddenly the entire sound of the band was different because they were using tracks to fill in for a missing bass player. Bass player wasn't there. They were using tracks to fill in for a missing bass player. I think of a lot of bands that travel as like a 3-piece or something, and they have keys that are tracked. These are both shaping the sound of their band and also filling in for missing musicians. Sometimes literally in the sense of like, instead of canceling the show, we're just going to unmute the bass part, filling in for missing musicians. But then sometimes literally being like, well, we're not traveling with a full string section, of a full horn section. We're not traveling with a keys player. We're not traveling with a percussion player. So we're just going to bring those parts, those elements from the studio and use them in our song on stage. If you're using tracks to fill in for missing musicians in that sense, it's absolutely essential to have a redundant rig, because if those tracks go down, you lose all of that. And if you're a smaller band, 3-piece band, and you've got a lot of keys and string stuff and percussion stuff coming through, to lose that, it's going to completely transform the sound of your band. If you're a great band, you're still going to sound great. It's just going to sound different. If you're okay with that, don't use a redundant rig, but you're probably not. You went through the effort to build it out. So go ahead and use a redundant rig. Pick up a Play Audio 12. Number 3, this is a sensitive subject for some people, so I'm not necessarily interested in a value judgment as to whether this is a good or bad thing, but just simply stating the reality. If you're relying on vocals in tracks, you 100% need a redundant playback rig. What I mean is, if you're on the road with a pop artist or a rock artist and lead vocals are tracked either throughout the entire song or for the high parts. If you remember Mariah Carey, the Rockin' New Year's Eve thing, and her in-ear mix was messed up. They didn't have their playback tech with them. And because of that, you could tell that a lot of the really high parts that Mariah typically would sing live were tracked. That's a situation where if that were to go down, you suddenly lose lead vocals. You want a redundant rig in that case, right? Which is super, super important. It's not always just lead vocals. And again, sometimes people hear that and go, well, we would never do that. Well, yeah, but you're also not on a tour where you've sold out every single night and you have hundreds of thousands of people coming to your shows, and you have hundreds of people reliant on you being at that show to make payroll, to pay them for them to feed their family. Sometimes you go, I'm okay with putting a vocal in a track for this one song because I can't hit, because I'm losing my voice, because I'm in a different city every night for 6 weeks in a row. Sometimes it's just BGVs. If you, again, 3-piece band, but you've got some great BGV parts, and you feel like if you were to lose that, then you would kind of lose the vibe of your show, your music, then you need a redundant rig. Number 4, the 4th reason you should use a redundant playback rig is if you have a connected stage. What I mean by that is maybe your playback rig is controlling presets on your Nord. Maybe your playback rig is sending clock to your guitar player's delay pedal so that they can stay in time and they don't have to tap tempo. Maybe you're sending MIDI over to your drummer's SPD or receiving MIDI from your drummer's SPD so they can trigger samples in live, and you want to pull up the exact sample at the exact right time. Maybe you have a keyboard on stage where your lead vocalist walks up and they put their hands on the keys, and at the exact right part of the exact right song, the exact right sound is there. That's called creating a connected stage. If you have a connected stage experience on stage or maybe even off stage, let's go back to number one. We talked about track shaping and being crucial to shaping the sound of your band. If you're playing with a pre-recorded track from an artist that's not there, you're probably showing a video. You're probably sending LTC to a media server, to a lighting console to trigger that video and video playback and keep it perfectly in sync. If you're doing that, you've got a connected stage. If you're sending MIDI cues to control Pro Presenter, sending MIDI cues to control change presets on a console, sending MIDI timecode to automate snapshots on a Digico console, whatever it is, you've got a connected stage experience. In that situation, you 100% need a redundant playback rig, because if playback goes down and you stop changing presets on your guitar player's pedals and suddenly they go to do like a solo and it's this bone clean Fender Twin sound, they're going to look back at you as the playback tech and say things that I can't say on a clean podcast. And you're probably going to be out of a job. So having a redundant rig means if that goes down, we go to the B rig, everything's fine. It's good. We're happy. Everyone's happy. Things keep getting changed. We can do our work to get the A machine back up, and then we can bring that up as needed. So those are 4 reasons why I believe you should use a redundant playback rig. Here's what I'd love to hear from you. Two possible scenarios here. If you're already using a redundant playback rig, I would love to hear what's your primary reason for using a redundant playback rig. Maybe it's one of these 4. So maybe, give me an inflated sense of self-importance and pride by going, you're exactly right, Will. The reason we use a redundant playback rig is this. Or maybe it's a thing I didn't list here. Maybe it's to be spontaneous and have one computer have a song and another computer have a song and switch between them. Maybe it's that. Let me know in the comments of this video why you have a redundant rig. Or maybe 2, you're listening to this and you're not currently doing that and you're going, Will, I get it, but here's the reasons why we don't use a redundant playback rig. Let me know that in the comments of this video. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, you can click the link to head over to YouTube to leave a comment there. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, do me a favor, leave me a rating or review for this episode. This really, really helps. It helps it get discovered. I see the charts every week. We kill in South Korea. A lot of people over there listening to it, and you could see the charts as it goes up. I believe it's on the music commentary chart. And I got this past week. I'm tempted to look up to see what other countries, but I know South Korea is a big one. So those of you listening in South Korea, thank you. But wherever you're listening, if you can give me a rating or review, you subscribe to the podcast, that really, really helps. And if you're on YouTube, do me a favor, hit subscribe and hit the bell icon so you're notified when I post new episodes of the podcast. And I post a new piece of content every single day. I don't sleep. All I do is record content all day, every day, for you to help make your life easier. And then finally, if you are using Ableton Live, you want some free resources to help using Ableton Live, and particularly using Ableton Live on stage a little easier, then head to FromStudioToStage.com/free. You can get all of our free resources there. Just add your name and email, and we'll get those sent right over to you. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Behind the Spacebar. We'll see you next week. Take care, everybody. Bye.